Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 24 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we are going to be talking about needs. More specifically, we will discuss personal needs when it comes to adventure, outdoor gear, and safety. During COVID-19, we saw a dramatic influx of new outdoor enthusiasts. This is great for many reasons, but it also means that there's a lot more people entering outdoor spaces, sometimes with very little knowledge of how to interact with landscapes safely and responsibly. Even if you're not completely new to outdoor recreation, maybe you're like me and you got into a new sport in the last couple of years. Anytime I start something new, I always go through a research and discovery process. This might look different for different people, but for me, I like to figure out what I might need, talk to people that are more experienced than me, and try things out a few times. That allows me to add gear gradually as I go. I've found that getting hyper-focused on the gear alone has its pros and cons. And in my experience, I've found it to be more detrimental just to be focusing on gear than not. I could likely rant and rave about outdoor gear and equipment, marketing, and the psychology of shopping for quite some time. But instead, I'll let my friend Moose Mutlow take the lead. Moose Mutlow has been active in the outdoors for more than 30 years as an instructor and guide. Currently based in Yosemite National Park, he is the Senior Project Director for Nature Bridge, the largest provider of environmental education in the U.S. National Park system. He has a long history of working in search and rescue and is a senior trainer for the National Park Service. Before we get to the interview, I want to remind all of you that the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon is still available. There are 2 different options, and if you want to learn more, go to theoutdoorminimalist.com. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax and hemp, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. So thanks for joining me today, Moose. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your experiences and insights regarding gear in the outdoor industry and outdoor safety in general. But before we jump right in, can you tell me a little bit more about how you first got involved in outdoor recreation and how that fits into your life today?
So I was really lucky as a kid. I had access to a park in the Midlands called Sutton Park, which is just down the road from my parents' house, and it's heathland and woodland. And just from the earliest age, I was running around, getting to jump in streams and run around the woods and ride my bike down hills. And that was, in Britain, that's kind of your opening. And I was in the Cub Scouts and did camping with them, and then family trips up to places like the Lake District or out to the coast for the beaches. So we were always in the outdoors. And as kids, when we were growing up, TV and computers weren't the option. We were kicked outside. And so you had that natural playground experience to kick off a life of leisure.
Yeah, that's a great early exposure. How did you integrate that through your adult life, and how does that influence your career now?
I went to a survival camp up in the north of Scotland when I was 16, 17 that was run by one of the first people to row across the Atlantic. And I had like a 2.5-week course up there and found out that you could have a career teaching people how to climb and canoe and go hiking and camping. And at that point, a door opened in perception for a career. And that next 3 or 4 years, as I went from working and eventually got to college, I got the opportunity to canoe off the south coast of England, sail a lot, and climb. And then that trajectory of working summers at summer camp and instructing during the college year turned into a lot of traveling and having enough experience to be able to get jobs in the outdoor industry around the world.
And you don't live in Britain anymore. So, what is your main outdoor activity that you just like to go and do now, and where are you located?
I live just outside of Yosemite National Park in California, and I love to be in or on the water. The thing I love to do more than anything else is to canoe. And so it's a 15-minute drive. I can get to the river, and I teach for Rescue 3, Swiftwater Rescue, so I get a chance to pass on some of that technical knowledge and train rescue teams. I like to walk when there's a point to it. So if I have a dog, I'll always go walking. I don't just like to walk up and down a trail. It has to have a point of either bird watching or an expedition. I love expeditioning, and the idea of, I spent some time last fall out working with a veterans group on the Gulf of Mexico on a canoe expedition, working with Outward Bound. And I like that idea of a journey with purpose.
Yeah, I agree. I think once I got a dog as an adult, my just walking in general increased so much, and having kind of like that goal behind the hike or the walk makes it more engaging, at least for me as well.
We have a rather large German Shepherd. He is hugely entertaining out on the ranch land, looking for opportunities to find baby bunnies to grab or ground squirrels to annoy. And his enthusiasm to be outdoors is catching, because there is just pure joy in that moment. There's pure athleticism when he's digging after something and moving a big rock out the way. And his observation skills are finely tuned, so you can see that coyote way down on the pasture before he's indicated, before you see it. And I really enjoy that aspect of being in and around a dog. It's a good cheat for getting some good sightings.
Yeah, it really is. I guess I want to start off our conversation about talking about your view of the current culture in the outdoor industry, specifically surrounding outdoor gear, because it seems like you have had exposure throughout pretty much your entire life to outdoor recreation in a bunch of different sectors, and the industry has changed a lot in the last 30 years. So in your opinion, what do you think the current nature of gear is in the outdoor industry?
I am really excited. It's no longer one size fits all. I think the movement towards accommodating different genders, different body shapes, different degrees of athleticism. I'm really excited about actually people being more comfortable with the gear they had. I started in the outdoors, where you would go down to the military surplus place and get a pair of ill-fitting pants, an ill-fitting jacket, a poncho, and that was your gear to go out. And there's beauty in that, because it's functional gear. But I fit in the mean. I'm like 5'11". I'm male, 180 pounds. I could find something that kind of fit me. But if you're on either end of that spectrum, or as far as gender, you have to make do with gear that quite honestly gets in the way, as opposed to allows you to enjoy the activity. So the idea that now we have more understanding of what people want and need, I think is great. I remember seeing one of the first women's sleeping bags that had been made specifically for women's physiology, and had someone explain it to me, and I was like, that's a really good idea. That makes sense. And the idea we'd had generations of people making do. I like the fact we have, at least on the gear end, of more democratic options as far as people meeting their needs.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that as well, especially with outdoor clothing. There is just a lot more inclusivity across genders and body types. I think there still could be more expansion, but the focus on that seems to become more mainstream, and that is really positive.
I think that you would see more specialist companies that are trying to specifically serve a distinct group culturally in society, and I think that's going to be a good thing, because you have more people understanding what your community needs. I like the idea that the internet has allowed people on a business end to have more viability beyond the big box stores. That's a beautiful thing about tech.
So I'm glad that you brought up something really positive to start as far as the general culture of gear, but what would be some places for growth, perhaps, I'll phrase it in that way, that you see right now?
Well, I mean, in marketing is like a key one is if you're going to broaden the base of the constituent you're serving, you need to have strong enough genuine images that show people that truly reflect society. And so if you're just going to have a single type of person who wears a single type of yoga pant, and the only vision that you see there is a certain white female stereotype, you're not going to broad base your market. It becomes exclusionary, if that's a word. The idea that you need to go beyond just a model, a beautiful image of someone, to actually have practical reflections of people using gear and have it less Instagrammy. I know that's kind of is counterintuitive to where we're at right now, but genuine use is a much more exciting thing than manufactured use.
Yeah, it gives a more realistic view and then offers that representation to make more of the minority folks that aren't necessarily what we're used to seeing in the outdoor industry as far as people that recreate outside, because everyone likes to be outside, at least the people that I have ever met. And it doesn't necessarily matter their gender, race, or size. It's just they like the outdoors because it brings a lot to you. And so that representation that you're talking about makes sense.
And it shouldn't be me deciding what that representation is. It's like I think we need to be better at listening to what people want and be supportive of their effort. I think one of the things about outdoor gear is it at its heart it's intimidating because there's perceptions you have to have the right gear, and actually one of my favorite pieces of gear is this really old piece of gear that's an old pile jacket, and I love it. It's Latok. It goes back to like the 90s, and it's just an awesomely battered piece of gear. I think when you present this pristine landscape of new gear, and these fresh faces that aren't actually using it in anything but an urban setting or at the bottom of a single pitch climb that's just been a magazine shoot, it just reinforces this idea that you've got to be specialist to get this thing, and you don't. We talk about minorities. It's actually underserved groups that we have to find ways to bring them into the outdoors and recognize them and find places for them to be comfortable.
That reminds me a lot. In one of my earlier episodes, we talked about sustainability in the outdoor industry and how that ties into finances. And something that I noticed as I started to get into new outdoor sports is the barrier to entry in certain activities seems or appears to be really high because of the way things are marketed, like you're explaining. Like you feel like you need certain gear in order to even start. And so my question for you is, how would you approach like a new activity and identify your needs for that gear and even get started? It doesn't really matter what it is. You can pick an activity that you're really comfortable talking about, but just in general.
I think the best way to start a new activity is to get friends. And by that, I mean, I think one of the struggles now within the outdoor world is having active mentorship and apprenticeship. When I started in the outdoors, I had a lot of people who knew more than me that I was tagging along with, who helped show me the way and helped me understand what I needed to do and help me build judgment. But they also had a lot of gear. So when I was boating, they would lend me a PFD, like a flotation device, before I actually needed to buy one so I could figure out what it felt like. Or clubs were in a position for me to start experimenting with different bits of equipment and understanding how that sort of what I needed for a starting gear. But it all came from personal connection and people. And I think that that's the place to start, is not to feel isolated, is to find the club and the mentorship where you can be part of it, because the practitioners there, I will guarantee, have a closet full of great gear that they're holding on to, that with a little bit of a chat, we'll start sharing it and loaning it and potentially giving it. You see it with skiing the whole time, that when people need a new set of skis or they need skis to start with, there's somebody who's like, I've got a set from last year, but I bought this new set this year because I got more side cut. Here, I'll give you them for X. And it's significantly less. And I like that. So the place to start is always going to be in connection. It's going to be with other people.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like that has been how I have definitely succeeded in pursuing new outdoor activities. Like, I really enjoy cycling, but I don't have a mountain bike, but a lot of my friends mountain bike. And whenever I go to different places, it always ends up that someone has a mountain bike in my size that I can borrow. And it has been really convenient. And now it definitely has kind of pushed me to identify some of the pieces of those types of bikes that I liked, different ones that I borrowed. In some areas, I did end up renting, but I think it also gives you a chance to kind of like try out some of your different options before just like going all in and investing in something that you may or may not really like.
Right, and I had this conversation with somebody. I rode bike and I mountain bike and I've done expedition biking and I really enjoy it. I'm not a gearhead and I'm definitely not a mechanic. I know enough to sort of do basic repairs. And this person saw a bike and they started talking about the ring sizes on the front, how many teeth they're on, and what he liked to do with his gears, and this is the different sets you want to. He must have done like a 15-minute chat about this thing, and he was really passionate about it. And he goes, "What do you think?" And I just said to him, "I don't know what you're talking about." And the thing about it is that he really enjoys cycling and gets it done, and I really enjoy like cycling and getting it done. And there's definitely a place I could be better on the education, but you don't have to know all that detail to appreciate being out there and doing the activity. You hear climbers talk about it as being the spray zone, where people are just blurting out what they've climbed and what they've done and how they've done. And it's so boring. It's so fantastically dull. And like, who cares if there's a crimpy thing? There's maybe two people who care about that crimpy hold up on the right. I'm much more interested about the four ravens sitting on the top of the crag, taking it in turns to do somersaults because there's an updraft there, and like them watching each other. It's like we all have different appreciations, but talking about gear is so reductive. It gets to a point where you just reduce the people listening around you, and you formed a little exclusive club. It's not very welcoming.
Yeah, that's really true. I just hearing you talk about that, I was flashing back to different scenarios that I've been in when people are similarly explaining something in great technical detail, and I'm like, I have no idea what is happening.
and it's fantastic that they have that level of appreciation, but the vast majority of people who've been involved in outdoor activities that I've been around don't get down to that scale, that very, very small scale. And yet that's what's in magazines, like how to place a specific piece of gear. There's 36 different articles about that. Whereas I wish there were 36 different articles about how to talk to other people when you're using the resource to be nice and build a community. That would be an article I'd be interested to read.
Yeah, me too. I think when I first got involved in independent outdoor activities, I did a lot of different things growing up and grew up on the prairie and spent a lot of time outside, similar to your childhood. But then approaching different outdoor activities, like the first one I think of is rock climbing, that I got really into independently. And approaching that set of gear, I was in college and I was really poor, and it kind of just came down to like the necessity of just really specific pieces of gear, and the rest of it I could borrow from people, like you're saying. So when we are approaching gear, what do you think is the best approach to integrate minimalism? For me in my life, I feel like it was a forced minimalism, and then I just was able to apply that as I grew in different activities. But how do you think minimalism fits into that approach to gear?
The great thing about being in the outdoors, apart from if you're on a rafting trip, is weight is the one thing you can control as far as being comfortable. The advent of this ultralight hiking has been great because you can go out for 4 or 5 days with 30 pounds on your back and be supremely comfortable walking and moving around across country and be reasonably comfortable sleeping at night. I like the idea of it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. And so like for any gear that you're looking at is A, does it do its job? B, when you put all your other stuff with it, does it form the necessities, what you actually need, or is it a bit of a luxury? That's kind of the way I think about minimalist. is what do I need and what do I need to be comfortable, and what is that next circle out, the luxury piece. Like there are these little espresso makers that you can have out in the field, and I love espresso, it's great. But do I really need to carry that thing for that 30-second shot in the morning? Probably not. And I can get away with having beans, chocolate covered coffee beans, and get the same hit, and I'm carrying less weight. The minimalist point is if you're comfortable walking or you're comfortable moving or comfortable going from A to B, that's the most important thing. So if you're unencumbered, that's going to enhance the experience.
When it comes to certain activities, I feel like sometimes people do get really hung up on the gear itself because of safety reasons. So climbing, for example, you do need a fair bit of safety gear depending on the type that you're pursuing. But how do you think people can best plan around that mentality that you're talking about in the realm of minimalism, but also focusing on safety and integrating that into their choices?
There's some things that don't have any weight, that don't actually physically impact you as far as gear, and it's building the experience to be safe in the outdoors. So building your experience is your redundancy in case there's a challenging thing. Your gear isn't going to get you out of it on the first layer, it's going to be your experience. So if you're up on a crag and a thunderstorm comes in and you have to evacuate off of there, having enough knowledge on how to improvise an anchor is going to be more critical than if you've got 2 sets of nuts, a set of camming devices, and double ropes. Like the fact that you can build the anchor in multiple places and get off there really quickly is the most important thing. And I think that gear can give the illusion of control and can give the illusion of safety because I'm carrying all this stuff. But if you actually don't have the resilience and the knowledge to use it correctly, it doesn't really matter. For me, as far as safety goes, it's having the bag of tricks to be able to know how to use your equipment appropriately. That's the most important thing out there.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier is the importance of mentorship in outdoor recreation and finding that network and finding people that you can rely on that can teach you those types of essential pieces. Like an emergency like that, you may not use every time that you are out climbing, but then in the instance when you need it, you really need it. So if you don't have that background knowledge that you're talking about, it can be really dangerous and difficult.
And if you've got this mentor and this person who can help you through the experience and be collaborative in your learning, that's a really powerful thing for other things to happen in the outdoors. Is those conversations, the shared experience, the building of community, that they're all healthy. I love to whitewater canoe, and I'm really picky about who I boat with. I've always boated with people. If I'm not seeing their head turn around or them spinning in rapids, checking on me as I come down that rapid, I don't want to boat with them because they're only aware of what they're doing. They're not aware of the rest of the group. And they're part of the safety mechanism for the rest of the group. So if you're a selfish paddler or you don't want to share knowledge or you do it on an ego-based piece, you're probably not the person you want to go on a trip with. Whereas the person who's a bit more aware and is finding the room to double check where you're at and do it in a way in which it's a lesson as opposed to feeling a control piece, those are probably the people you're going to have multiple trips with. That's a really good place to be. And in a disconnected world where we operate virtually on so much, and we talk about friends that we have online, but you have no shared experience, no physical shared experience, rediscovering that connection is another gift of the outdoors. The challenge in that moment, you could argue, is uncontrived because you're responding to it in real time. And that richness of that shared experience and that reaction can move our lives forward. It makes us more generous as people. It makes us more empathetic, compassionate. It makes us friendlier. I think there's a lot of optimism that the natural world and the outdoors has to offer us, particularly when you're doing it with someone else.
Yeah, I have noticed that the experiences really do shift and change depending on the people that you're with and how comfortable you really are with them. I do think a lot of times people default to talking about your needs in terms of gear and safety, but then looking at your needs in terms of that specific adventure and the experience that you personally would enjoy.
Yeah, when it's just a long list of automatic ascents or descents on rivers or Like I'm fascinated by people who are doing speed hikes and speed runs on the Pacific Cross Trail or the Appalachian Trail, and I just think they've totally missed the point. Which sounds terribly judgmental. I mean, if that's what they really want to do, go for it. That's awesome. Like that they're doing that. But on a personal level, I want to see that country and not have it race by me in the dark. The reason we have those long trails was this sort of journey. It was this idea that people could tackle all of these incredible vertical gains and go from on the East Coast from Appalachia and go all the way up to, was it New Hampshire, and see the country, experiencing it, like really experiencing it, not totally under duress and being stressed out because you've got to make a food drop in the next 2 hours. That sounds way too stressful for me for the outdoors. Like the outdoors should bring recharge. As much as it builds challenge, when you've got through it, it's recharged you to deal in a chaotic world.
It is often used as a way that most of us now disconnect and decompress. And so I do identify with what you're saying. But to some people, those speed hikes or those long distance treks that don't interest someone like me, that might be one of their perfect outlets. So that is more so fitting into what their needs are as a human.
I can see that. I think that the quest, a few years ago, I was at a dinner and I ended up in a conversation with somebody who's working on an initiative to have the youngest person climb the 7 summits. They were going to be ridiculously young. I was appalled by that because at that age, the only reason that person was doing it was A, there was financial backing behind it, but that an adult was probably pushing them pretty hard to go through that level of discomfort. And if I've been up on Denali and I was in base camp on a search and rescue rotation, and it was the trip that I realized that I really hated mountaineering. It was kind of pointless. It was so uncomfortable for me. And the idea of a 14-year-old being coerced into doing that adventure because of what was going to come out of it on a media end and financially was an obscenity within the outdoors. And I think this quest to be faster, lighter, on the Instagram sort of piece is incredibly influential, that people see what is my best, what is my fastest, and I struggle with that. That might be the bag they're into, but are they getting the most out of it? I'm not so sure. I'm kind of saddened by that because people race through experiences. It's like when you talk to travelers and they say they've seen all these things, but have they experienced them? They've done it in the company of a bunch of expats, but they don't know any locals. And my richest experiences in traveling has always been based in being in one place for an extended period of time. But I might not be seeing the biggest peaks or the wildest rivers, but I am seeing this, I'm having this intimacy with that landscape that is only born out of slowing down.
Yeah, and I see that across really all outdoor sports, at least in the way that I'm perceiving it, the way you're explaining it. Like in cycling, I've noticed that at times I have a hard time going on group rides and things like that because I'll do like road or gravel biking and I don't have any type of tracking device. And they're like, well, how far did you go? How fast did you go? And I was like, well, I went around this way and I don't know how long it took because I stopped like 6 times to look at stuff. And so it really is your focus, I think. Sometimes when your focus is redirected towards the experience, it changes a lot of the way you're acting during an activity, at least for me.
I have a tracking device that I use to sort of figure out if I'm getting enough exercise in over a week. And I did this really big ride and I didn't start my tracking device until halfway through it. And it raised a sort of existential question. If I didn't track it, did it actually happen?
No.
Right? But it's a really good question is how much does showing what you've done define the value of that experience? And the outdoors doesn't care. Mountains don't care about your data. If you haven't got the experience, you haven't got the judgment, or you don't have a bit of luck, whether you've got a tracking device on or not, and you have an accident, you're going to have to get yourself out of there. They don't care about data. And I think data has a role to play, but it shouldn't ever define whether you do or don't do an experience, or that you value or don't value experience. When data commands you and runs you, the system is broken to me.
Yeah, I definitely see the value of tracking and using data at times. I'm definitely not against it in any way. But yeah, for me, I do liken it to the use of social media and stuff like that. Like, if you didn't post it, did it happen? Or if you didn't share it, did it happen? It is that strange, yeah, it is a strange question, but it's real. It's a real part of our society now.
And I think that the beauty of the outdoors is if you go on an extended trip and you are completely hooked up to your tech and you have no way to recharge it, 3 days in, you're free because there's no power out there. I like that idea. This trip I just did with veterans on the Gulf of Mexico, we gave them the option to let take their phones away. We gave them a group camera so they could take photographs. We asked them to leave their watches behind. They left their watches behind. They stepped back from that for 4 or 5 days. And it's incredibly releasing. That's the understated value of the outdoors, or needs to be restated over and over again. Natural light, the sounds of nature, they all allow us to reset our internal clocks, reset our internal balance. And the longer you're out there, the healthier you're going to be. And if people stay riveted to their screen or riveted to how many different pictures I'm going to curate in this moment, you're gonna miss it. You're gonna miss the beauty. I was in Southern Africa as a teenager, and I had this nice camera I bought, and I started taking photographs of big animals, and I got the pictures developed, and I've never really taken a photograph since. I mean, I've taken snaps with my phone, but I've never needed a camera for a trip because those animals were so small on that photograph, and they were so indistinct. The smells, the texture, the noise were not conveyed within it. And it taught me really early on to observe. And then from that, tell my story. And my story might not be as accurate because I didn't take a photograph or record it, but that's stories. Stories are what bind us ultimately to that experience.
Yeah, and I mean, in some instances, photography is often the reason that people set out on certain adventures because they love to photograph wildlife and things like that. But I do understand what you're saying, how it is very difficult unless you're very skilled in photography to really capture all of those things. And even if you're skilled at photography, you're not going to get the full experience, like the sounds and the smells like you're talking about.
I was in Yellowstone, and there was a sort of bear wolf thing happening, and there must have been 100 photographers stressed out of their gourd fighting for position on this little embankment in the Lamar Valley. And the pressure that you could feel out of this group was really disturbing because it became really competitive and people were jostling for position and what can you see, oh quiet, I'm recording. We brought this sort of modern day stress into this very fundamental landscape. I have friends who are professional photographers who are able to have the experience and create these amazing images that don't detract from what you're experiencing. That's the other side of tech, is that we've got so much we could be doing. And the minimalist piece for me is leave all that really flash camera gear behind and go out with your iPhone and you'll get what you need and no more. Like less is more.
Yeah, most of the time you just need a few snapshots to remember a couple of things and then you're probably good to go. And I do think sometimes it reminds me of what you were saying earlier, is how we can often over rely on certain pieces of gear. And I think in some respects, we do over rely on technology in a lot of instances. I love GPS systems. I think that they are a great invention and very useful. And I carry a spot device with me when I go into the backcountry in case there is an emergency and I need help or something. But I have also run into people on the trail that don't have any paper maps or any idea of the route that they're on, and their GPS dies and they have no way to navigate, and you're like, oh, do you need help? And they can borrow your paper map. But I do think that understanding that safety piece and not over relying on those types of gear is also important.
And I think the map thing is a really good example of if you're going to understand navigation, a map and a compass are not that complicated, particularly in the western United States where you've got vast areas that are open, or the prairies. where you can see for miles and be like, oh, there's that high point over there, or that's where the river is over there. It's pretty easy. That would be the one bit of gear I think everybody should have in the field is a map of where they're going and a compass to be able to see what direction they're going in. Because you lose the GPS unit and you've lost your guide because of power or because you dropped it in the river, that was an avoidable reliance on somebody else. I like that idea that you build resilience by incrementally by getting small building blocks, and navigation is one of them. Learning how to start a fire is another one. Understanding how to purify water, it's another basic thing. And understanding how you don't get heat exhaustion and dehydrated, or you get overhydrated. Those are 3 or 4 things that can make all the difference out there in having a positive experience over a nightmare experience.
Yeah, and they are not necessarily the things that if you're going in backpacking for the first time or something, they might not be top of mind. And so finding that mentor, like you're saying, but if you don't have a mentor, there are amazing classes put on by many local outfitters, and even many REIs, I think, have basic navigation classes or intro to backpacking that will help you learn how to pack a backpack. So I think that there are resources available, but they need to be sought out in some instances.
I think that the industry-based ones, it's in their interest to create knowledgeable customers to buy their products, so that those are very accessible classes, in the same way that there are scholarships available for people who maybe come from underserved communities to go to the National Outdoor Leadership School, or go to Outward Bound, or go to Boulder Outdoor Survivor School, any of those other programs that have primitive skills through to expedition skills and expedition behavior. There is opportunity. I'm very grateful that I started in the scouting movement as a little kid, and I think that created a really good baseline set of experiences. But people forget that our instructors were normally our parents, and they knew only a little bit more, or come from a military background maybe, and they had a little bit more knowledge. They just created an atmosphere where you could have a safe adventure. I think kids today, in which landscapes have been designed to exclude play or exclude adventure and exploration, we have to be more conscious about shepherding those people towards groups like the Boys and Girls Club, or mountaineering clubs, or American Whitewater, or whatever the advocacy group is, because there's opportunity there for them to be mentored. And all of it's about getting wet, getting dirty, getting a great view. That's kind of the bottom line. And then you come home and you go, I got this great story, and it isn't the mall. And you can have an adventure at the mall, but this adventure where you went up the top of a hill and you touched the clouds, that's a game changer. That's that mythical moment in a young person's development where you want to plant that little diamond in a hard existence to show them there's something else out there, and hopefully that will shine at some later point in their life, or it gives them something to draw on as they go through their daily struggle. Society needs to get back in touch, and it needs to open its arms and be more comfortable with people with different ideas about how to use a resource and maybe what they need. And instead of being prescriptive, you have to do this, be like, that's one way of doing it. What's the other way of doing it?
Yes, and I do think that in many locations, access to outdoor spaces are closer than most people think, because I can think back as a child. I was lucky because I grew up in a rural community, but even in a town like I live in now that might be a little bit bigger, there are local parks and trails that you can access, and it doesn't need to be this big grand adventure, especially for a child to discover something new.
Right, and I like the idea of people having adventure in their home, in their backyard. There was a guy who we interviewed at Outward Bound, or a colleague interviewed, and one of the reasons he got offered a job was he had tried to canoe every river in his county. And I'm much more interested in that person who said, oh, I went to Nepal and I was guided down this river, and then I went to the Everest Base Camp on a guided trip. The idea that they found this adventure in this smaller blueprint is really exciting to me.
Well, I had a lot of great takeaways from just hearing you talk about your experiences and your insights. So I'm going to kind of wind down the conversation. And I'm wondering if people are interested in learning more about you and your career, your pursuits, because you also are the author of a book. Is that correct?
Yeah, I work a lot in search and rescue, and I am the swiftwater trainer for the Yosemite Search and Rescue Team, and I've worked in national parks for the last 20 years in and around search and rescue and environmental education. And I wrote a book last year that specifically looks at supporting families during rescues and recoveries. And the book's called When Accidents Happen. If people are interested in more of what I do in and around teaching, I've got a Moose Mutlow on Instagram, and at moosemutlow.com is my website. And that talks a little bit more about some of the other things I've done.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I will be sure to put the links to your book, website, and then all the socials in the episode notes. So if people want to check those out later, you can access those there. So thanks for coming on the show today, Moose. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for the chance to chat.
Huge thank you to Moose for having time to jump on the show and share some of his wonderful insights, experiences, and perspectives. It gave me a lot to think about, and I hope that it helps you find what you need in your next adventure. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. New content has begun to appear on the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon. Head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com for more information about our listener support and patron exclusives. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates and other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with a shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.